Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed the first chapter, Slump. Now we're going to read the second chapter, and it's called Chapter 2, Breakup. It says, the definition here says, breakup. Dissolution of a unit, an organization, or a group of organizations. The Justice Department sometimes forces the breakup of large corporations into several smaller companies. So it's talking about how the big companies are being broke off into smaller companies. So I bet that has something to do with this chapter. So let's see. Chapter 2, Breakup. Jessie didn't get it. She just didn't get it. What was Evan's problem? He'd been acting like a weirdo for 2 days now, and it was 2 days ago that the letter had arrived. But why would he be so upset about that letter? This is a puzzle, Jessie told herself, and I'm good at puzzles, but it was a puzzle about feelings, and Jessie knew that feelings were her weakest subject. Jessie sat in the cool darkness of the basement and thought back to Monday, the day the letter had come. Everything had been normal. She and Evan were putting together a lemonade stand in the driveway when the mailman walked up and handed Jessie a bundle of letters. Evan never bothered to look at the mail, but Jessie always was always entering contests and expecting to win. So she flipped through the letters right away. Boring, 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 said Jessie as each letter flashed by. Hey, something from school addressed to Mom. She held up a plain white envelope. What do you think it is? A letter from school. Dunno, said Evan. He was in the garage and covering the small wooden table they usually use for a stand. It was buried under 2 snow tubes, 2 boogie boards, and the garden hose. Jessie watched while Evan gave a mighty pull and lifted the table up over his head. Wow, he's gotten so big, thought Jessie, remembering what Mom had said about Evan's growth spurt. Sometimes Jessie felt like Evan was growing twice as fast as she was. Growing up, growing away. It looks important, said Jessie. It looks like bad news, is what she thought in her head. Was there a problem, a complaint, a mix-up? All the nervousness she'd been feeling about skipping to 4th grade suddenly bubbled up inside her. This table's really dirty, said Evan. Do you think we can just cover it with a lot of cups and the pitcher and nobody will notice? Jessie looked. The table was streaked with black. No. Evan groaned. I'll clean it, said Jessie. Evan had only agreed to have a lemonade stand because it was one of her favorite things to do. The least she could do for him was clean up the gunk off the table. Maybe, she said, holding up the envelope again, they're postponing school. Maybe the first day isn't going to be next Tuesday, you think? That got Evan's attention. Well, let's ask Mom to open it, he said. Up in the humming cool of her attic office, Mrs. Tresky read the letter through once. Well, she said, this is a curveball. She looked right at Evan. Jessie thought her face looked worried. Evan, you and Jessie are going to be in the same class this year. You're both going to have Miss Overton. Would you like to be in the same class as your brother or your sister? I don't know about that. Jessie felt relief flood her entire body. The same class. If she could have wished for one thing in the whole world, that's what she would have wished for. She would be with Evan, and Evan would make everything easier. He would introduce her to all those 4th graders, and he would show them all that she was okay, not some puny 2nd grader who didn't really belong. So his sister, Jessie, is getting to skip 3rd grade and go straight to 4th grade. She must be really smart. But Evan didn't look so happy. He looked angry. Why? He asked in an almost shouting voice. Miss Tresky scanned the letter. Well, the classes were small to start with, and now some of the 4th graders they thought would be attending aren't because they're moving or switching to a private school, so they need to combine the 2 small classes into a bigger class. That is so unfair, said Evan. I wanted Mrs. Scobie, and I don't want, he looked at Jessie. This is so unfair. Jessie was surprised. This was great news. Why didn't Evan see that? They always had fun together at home, and now they can have fun together at school. It'll be fun, she said to Evan. It will not be fun, said Evan. School isn't fun. And then he stomped downstairs and locked himself in his room for the rest of the afternoon. They never finished the lemonade stand. And here it was, 2 days later, and Evan was still all locked up, even though he wasn't in his room. He wouldn't talk to her, and he wouldn't play with her. I don't think Evan's happy about having his sister in his room. So Jessie went up to her room and did what she always did when she was upset or angry or sad or confused. She started reading Charlotte's Web. She had read the book about 100 times. That's a really good book. It's a really good book, Charlotte's Web. She was at the good part, the happy part. Wilbur had just been named some pig, and he was getting all kinds of attention from the Zuckermans and the whole town, but Jessie couldn't settle into it. That happy feeling, the one that usually came when Charlotte said, "I dare say my trick will work, and Wilbur's life can be saved." Instead, she kept noticing an unhappy feeling tap, tap, tapping on her shoulder. And it wasn't that unhappy feeling that came from knowing that Charlotte was going to die on page 171. It was Evan. She couldn't stop thinking about what he said. Jessie could only remember one other time that Evan had said, "I hate you," to her. Grandma had been over and Evan needed help with his math homework. He had that frustrated, screwed up mouth look that he sometimes gets when he does math or spelling or writing. Mom called it he's gonna blow look, but Grandma couldn't help him because it was all Greek to her. So Jessie had shown him how to do each problem. Well, she just sort of jumped in and done the problem for him. That was helping, wasn't it? Grandma had called her a girl genius, but Evan had ripped his paper in half and run upstairs, shouting, "I hate you," just before slamming his door. And that was last year. Jessie rested the book on her stomach and stared at the ceiling. People were confusing. She'd rather do 100 math problems than try to figure out someone else's mixed up feelings any day of the week. That's why she and Evan got along so well. He'd just tell her straight out, "I'm mad at you because you ate that last Rice Krispie treat." And then she would say, "Sorry, how about a starburst from my room? You want that?" And then he would be all right. Evan was a straight shooter. Not like the girls at school, the ones who had started that club. She rolled over onto her side to get away from those thoughts. Across the room, against the opposite wall, she noticed that the 3 pieces of foam core her mom had brought for Jessie's Labor Day project. Every year, the Rotary Club sponsored a competition for kids to see who could come up with the best display related to the holiday. This was the first year Jessie was old enough to participate, and she had begged her mom to buy foam core and gel pens and fluorescent paper and special stickers for her display. She was determined to win the prize money, $100. But she hadn't been able to come up with a single idea that seemed good enough. So here it was just 5 days before the competition, and the foam core was still completely blank. Jessie reached for her book. She didn't want to think about the girls at school, and she didn't want to think about the competition so she started reading again. Wilbur and getting tongue-tied. Wilbur and Charlotte were at the fair, and Charlotte was beginning to show her age. Jessie read the words that Wilbur said to his best friend. "I'm awfully sorry to hear that you're feeling poorly, Charlotte. Perhaps if you spin a web and catch a couple of flies, you'll feel better." Well, that second part didn't apply at all, but Jessie imagined herself saying the first line. "I'm awfully sorry to hear that you're feeling poorly, Evan." It sounded about right. At least it would show him that she cared, and Jessie knew that this was important. When someone was feeling upset, she decided to go downstairs and give it a try. She would do just about anything to get Evan back to the way he was before the letter. Jessie looked in the kitchen and the backyard. No Evan. She was halfway down the steps to the basement when she heard a noise coming from the garage. She opened the door and felt the full heat of the day on her skin. It was like some giant had blown his hot, stinky breath in her face. In the garage, she found Evan and Scott Spencer. Weird, she thought. Evan doesn't even like Scott Spencer. They've been on again friends from kindergarten. But ever since Scott had purposely put Evan's bike helmet under the wheel of the Tresky's minivan so that Mrs. Tresky ran over it when she backed out, their friendship had definitely been off. Jessie looked from Evan to Scott and back again. Now she had no idea what to say. "I'm awfully sorry to hear that you're feeling poorly, Evan." Didn't seem to make much sense when Evan was obviously having fun with his friend. She tried to think of something else to say. All she could come up with was, "What are you doing?" The boys were bent over a piece of cardboard, and Evan was writing letters with a skinny red felt-tip pen. The purple cooler was in the middle of the garage, and 2 plastic chairs were stacked on top of it. On the top of the chair was a brown paper bag. "Nothing," said Evan, not looking up, and Jessie walked over to the boys and peered over Evan's shoulder. And this is the sign they made. It says lemonade, 50 cents. She said, "You spelled lemonade wrong. It's an O, not an I." But she thought, "Oh, good. A lemonade stand, my favorite thing to do." And he did spell lemonade wrong. The boys didn't say anything. Jessie saw Evan's mouth tighten up. "You want me to make the lemonade?" she asked. "Already made," said Evan. "I could decorate the sign," she said. "I'm good at drawing butterflies and flowers and things." Scott snorted. "Ha! We don't need girls' stuff like that on our sign. Do you want to use my lockbox to keep the money in? It's got a tray with separate compartments for all the different coins." "Nope," said Evan, still working on the sign. "Well," she said, looking around, "I can clean the table for you." The small wooden table, still covered in black streaks, was pushed up against the box. "We're not using it," said Evan. "But we'll always use the table for a stand," said Jessie. Evan pushed his face in her direction. "We don't want it." So it looks like he's going to make a stand with his friend. Jessie took a couple of steps back. Her insides felt runny like a fried egg that hadn't cooked enough. She knew she should just go back into the house, but for some reason her legs wouldn't move. She stood still, her bare feet rooted to the cool cement. Scott whispered something to Evan, and the two boys laughed, low and mean. Jessie swayed toward the door, but her feet stayed planted. She couldn't stand it there, that Evan wanted to be with Scott, who was a real jerk more than her. "Hey," she said, "I bet you need change. I've got a ton. You could have all my change, as long as you pay it back at the end of the day." "Don't need it," said Evan. "Yeah, you do," said Jessie. "You always need change, especially in the beginning. You'll lose sales if you can't make change." Evan capped the pen with a loud snap and stuck it in his pocket. "Scott's bankrolling us. His mom keeps a change jar, so we got plenty." The boys stood up and Evan held the sign for Scott to read, turning his back on Jessie. "Awesome," said Scott. Jessie knew that this sign was not awesome. The letters were too small and thin to read from the distance. Evan should have used a fat tip marker instead of a skinny tip marker. Everybody knew that. There weren't any pretty decorations to attract customers, and the word lemonade was spelled wrong. Why wouldn't Evan take a little help from her? She just wanted to help. Scott turned to her and said, "Are you really going to be in 4th grade this year?" Jessie's back stiffened. "Yep," she said. "Wow, that is so freaky." "It is not," she said, sticking her chin out. "It is too," said Scott. "I mean, you're a 2nd grader, and now you're going to be in 4th grade? That's just messed up." Jessie looked at Evan, but he was busy taping the sign to the cooler. "Lots of people skip grades," said Jessie. "It's not that big of a deal." "It's completely weird," said Scott. "I mean, you miss everything from a whole year. You missed the whole unit on Antarctica, and that was the best part. And the field trip to the aquarium. And the thing where we sent letters all over the country. Remember that, Evan? You got that letter from Alaska? That was so cool." Evan nodded, but he didn't look up. "It's not that big a deal," said Jessie. "It's like you miss a year of your life," Scott said. "It's like you're going to die a whole year earlier than the rest of us because you never had 3rd grade." Jessie felt cold and hot at the same time. Part of her wanted to yell, "That doesn't make any sense." But the other part of her felt so freakish, like Scott had just noticed she had 3 legs. Evan stood up and tossed the paper bag to Scott. Then he grabbed the plastic chairs with one hand. "Come on, let's go." And he reached down to grab one handle of the cooler. Scott grabbed the other, and together they lifted it and began to walk out the garage. "Hey," Evan said. "Hey, Evan," said Jessie, calling to their backs. "Can I come too?" "No," he said without turning around. "Come on, please. I'll be a big help. I can do lots of things." "You're too young," he said sharply. "You're just a baby." The boys walked out. "You're just a baby," she thought. Jessie couldn't believe Evan had said that. After all the stuff they'd done together, and he was only 14 months older than she was, hardly even a full year. She was about to yell back something really harsh, something stinging and full of bite, like, "Oh, yeah?" when she heard Scott say to Evan, "Man, I can't believe you have to be in the same class as your little sister. If that happened to me, I'd move to South America." "Yeah, tell me about it," said Evan, crossing the street. The words died on Jessie's lips, and she watched Evan walking away, getting smaller and smaller. He was deserting her. He wasn't going to stand by her at school. He wasn't going to smooth the way for her. He was going to be on the other side with all of them looking down on her, telling everyone that she was too young to be part of the crowd, telling everyone that she didn't belong. "Fine for you, Evan Tresky," she said as she marched into the house, her fists balled up at her sides. "I don't need you. I don't need you to have fun. I don't need you to run a lemonade stand, and I don't need you to make friends in the 4th grade." Halfway up the stairs, she stopped and shouted, "And I am not a baby." There we go, chapter 2. Tomorrow we'll read chapter 3, Joint Venture. I hope you enjoyed it.